December 31st, 1932. This fall sees national elections once again, and sees the Nazi Party actually losing ground for the first time in several years. Have they shot their bolt? Has Hitler's mystique faded? Have President Hindenburg and Chancellor von Papen managed to rein him in? So many questions to answer, so let's get to it. I'm Indy Neidell, and welcome to the Weimar Wire, now quarterly coverage of what's going on in Germany and around the world. Over the summer, the political violence continued to grow ahead of the National Reichstag elections, growing to the point that Chancellor Franz von Papen used it as an excuse for his national government to take over direct control of the state of Prussia, the last bastion of German democracy. The elections themselves were a big win for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, and yet when the Reichstag met, von Papen dissolved it and called for new elections now in November, and ruled by decree backed by President Paul von Hindenburg. If you've been following this series, you'll know that some episodes focus on politics, some on events in the streets, and even sometimes foreign policy takes precedence. Today is politics, and more politics, since the machinations that go on this fall are insane. We're going to have yet more elections. After a total of 4 elections during 1932, the National Socialists were pessimistic as the campaign for the 5th began. Constant electioneering had greatly depleted NSDAP finances. In a speech to the Reich Propaganda Conference on the 6th of October, Hitler tried to mobilize party workers for the coming elections, saying, "We National Socialists will give the nation an unprecedented display of our strength of will. I head this struggle with absolute confidence. Let the battle commence. In 4 weeks we'll emerge victorious." On October 11th, Adolf Hitler goes on his 4th flight over Germany in 6 months to campaign. This time, he visits no fewer than 50 cities and towns, giving up to 3 speeches a day with his election slogan, "Down with reactionaries." His crowds are smaller than they were over the summer, though, and sometimes Hitler's supporters are even bussed in to swell them. He focuses his ire on von Papen, whom he calls a chancellor without a people, which is actually kind of true. Von Papen has support from literally no one in the country except Hindenburg. Hitler makes very clear in his speeches his reasons for not accepting von Papen's offer to join his cabinet back in August. He says he didn't want to get on a train he'd only get off of a few months later, and he didn't support the actions of the reactionaries driving the train. He's not the kind of guy who joins one coalition after another. He wants full power. That's it, full power, no less. On October 12th, von Papen makes a campaign speech, which gets a lot of publicity, in which he promises constitutional reform. He wants to set up an authoritarian, nonpartisan state regime, saying that the government should be independent of political parties, independent of parliament. To counterbalance one-sided decisions by the Reichstag based on party interests, Germany needs a special first chamber, with clearly defined authority and strong legislative powers. If this sounds like von Papen saying he wants to legally destroy parliamentary democracy in Germany, that's because he is. The elections are November 6th, at the 60-day maximum time limit in which to have new elections after the Reichstag was dissolved in September. There is something big that happens a few days before that, though. The Berlin Transport Company has imposed wage cuts, and on November 3rd, the city's transport workers go on strike, bringing the city to a literal standstill, paralyzing it. The strike is, of course, supported by the KPD, the Communist Party. Here's the thing, though. It is not supported by the trade unions nor by the Social Democrats, which surprises many who ask the workers to accept an arbitration agreement and go back to work. You know what surprises even more people? That the strike does have the support of the Nazi Party. Yep. Hitler announces their support. I'm pretty sure this is to try and get voters by showing off socialist credentials, but there's a big risk it will alienate middle-class voters. We saw last time that those were the party's bread and butter. And the party didn't actually do that well at the polls among workers, especially unemployed workers in the big cities. So it's a fine line to attract new voters without putting off old ones. It's probably also really weird when people see communists and Nazis in the same picket lines, considering all the street violence between them the past couple years. So, how do the elections go? Well, voter turnout is down from the July elections to 80.6% of the electorate from 84.1%. I'm guessing some people are tired of voting every few months, but 80% is still a lot. The results are a setback for Hitler and the Nazis, dropping from 37.3% to 33.1% of the vote, losing 2 million votes since July and 34 seats in the Reichstag. They still have 196, and they're still the largest party, but the seemingly irresistible rise of Hitler in elections since 1930 had finally been halted. Joseph Goebbels thought Hitler's decision not to enter Papen's government was the chief reason for the loss of middle-class support. Local party reports confirmed this assessment, with one concluding the party leader does not know what he wants and has no program. Just as in July, the vote swung away from the traditional middle-class parties, now there is a swing back to them. The DNVP more than triples its share of the vote, getting 8.3% and 51 seats. The smaller DVP gets 11 seats, up 4, suggesting that the traditional middle-class voters are going back to those traditional middle-class parties. The parties on the left both win and lose. The Social Democrats lose 12 seats and now have 121, but are still the second largest party. But the Communist Party keeps rising, gaining 11 seats to have 100 even. They are now the third largest party, not all that far behind the Social Democrats, and their gains have been largely at the expense of the Social Democrats. Voters who thought the SPD leadership too weak for not being either willing or able to stand up to the Prussian coup of the summer. They've switched to the Communists. So how will this affect the Chancellor and his cabinet? Kurt von Schleicher, the guy who we've seen manipulating things in the background the past year, and the guy responsible for von Papen being Chancellor in the first place, proposes November 17th that the whole von Papen cabinet resign. And then Hindenburg could take the time to talk to all prospective alternative candidates for Chancellor. Only 63 of the 585 members of the Reichstag actually support von Papen. Von Papen talks to Hindenburg and tells him he wants to resign for failing, as he's tried to do for months, to unite the various right-wing parties into a majority coalition government of national concentration. Because of this, he is well aware that as soon as the Reichstag meets, someone is going to introduce a motion of no confidence in him, and it's going to pass, and then the Reichstag will be dissolved again, and then they'll have to have yet another national election. It just goes in circles. Hindenburg is a bit surprised, but does accept von Papen's resignation with the proviso that he and his cabinet stay on as caretakers and help form the new government. He still has Hindenburg's complete confidence. Papen tells Hindenburg to ask Hitler to form a majority coalition of national concentration. Hindenburg then has talks with Hitler on both November 19th and 21st. He doesn't only talk with Hitler, though. This is part of him talking with all the party leaders, except the Communists and Social Democrats. Those two have made very clear they are not at all interested. Anyhow, Hindenburg asks Hitler about trying to form a coalition government like von Papen suggested. Thing is, Hindenburg says that if Hitler can manage to form a majority government, Schleicher has to stay on as Minister of Defense, and Konstantin von Neurath as Foreign Minister. I don't think I mentioned it last time, but von Papen appointed him in June. Neurath was one of Schleicher's list of cabinet positions for von Papen to appoint when he became Chancellor. Hindenburg also says that national control of the state of Prussia, the largest German state by far, which we saw happen over the summer, must be made permanent. Hindenburg also wants final approval over Hitler's choices for the rest of his cabinet. That's asking a lot, I think. At the meetings, though, Hitler accepts these conditions, but then on the 23rd, he writes to Hindenburg saying that he's not been able to form a coalition, and he asks Hindenburg to make him Chancellor anyhow, giving him full presidential powers and also allowing him to pass an enabling act after which he'd be able to rule without the approval of either the president or the Reichstag, basically giving him total power. Hindenburg sends him a letter back the next day that says he's not going to give Adolf Hitler complete presidential powers, since the Nazi Party always says it wants exclusive rule, and he thinks a Hitler-led government would become a one-party dictatorship. This isn't exactly new. It's pretty much the same thing he told him when they met in August. Hitler thinks, aha, these talks are just a sham anyhow, and Hindenburg wants to keep von Papen as Chancellor. And Hitler is kind of right. Hindenburg requests another meeting, and Hitler says no, he doesn't see the point. So is von Papen going to be Chancellor again? Who else would be? Well, there's von Schleicher himself. He actually asks Hitler at one point if he would be in a Schleicher-led cabinet, and Hitler says, no way, not a chance. Hindenburg invites Papen and Schleicher to both meet with him December 1st at the presidential palace. At this meeting, Papen proposes something pretty radical when Hindenburg asks him what he thinks they should do. Papen told him Hitler had refused all possible parliamentary combinations, meaning the only way to bring him into government was to offer him the post of chancellor, supported by full presidential powers. But he felt that was too risky. Papen now offered a drastic solution, suggesting he should remain chancellor for the time being under a, quote, state of emergency. He would then carry through a dictatorial fighting program that would involve eliminating the Reichstag, using the army to suppress the Communist and National Socialist parties, and force through a new constitution which would be put to the German people in a referendum or submitted to a new National Assembly. Papen also made clear that refusing or postponing an election for any length of time would mean Hindenburg was violating the current constitution. In essence, Papen was asking Hindenburg to create a full-blown dictatorship backed up by the Reichswehr. Schleicher says, that would be pretty risky. I mean, if Hindenburg does this, proclaiming military emergency and violating the Constitution, he really does run the risk of impeachment and of a two-thirds majority in the Reichstag removing him from office. Hindenburg can do the current math and says, yeah, that might really happen. What else could they do? Schleicher says, well, why not make him chancellor? And he could get Gregor Strasser and a breakaway group of left-leaning Nazis who are unhappy with the party abandoning actual socialist principles. They also don't like Hitler's all-or-nothing scheme, and if they join Schleicher, he could probably reach out across the political spectrum and make a coalition, and then run a program to reduce unemployment and stimulate the depressed economy. Papen says, wait a second, that's a return to the full parliamentary system, but what Hindenburg wants is a more powerful presidential regime independent from parliament, right? That's the opposite. Hindenburg listens to all of this, thinks for a minute, then stands up and says he's rolling with Franz von Papen and his proposal. If you think Schleicher is just going to go along with this and accept political defeat, after all we've seen of Schleicher, you are very much mistaken. That was December 1st, yeah? The very next day, there's a cabinet meeting, and Papen gives his cabinet an account of the meeting with Hindenburg. Defense Minister Schleicher is there, of course, and he has a report with him. It is the report of a war game conducted by Eugen Ott for the Department of Defense to determine if the Reichswehr, the German armed forces, would be able to control a civil uprising by both the Nazis and the Communists at the same time and still defend the Polish border. Ott has concluded that, no, the Reichswehr could not maintain order in such a situation. Schleicher says such a situation could well arise if Hindenburg declares Papen's state of emergency. I mean, look at the transport strike last month. That was communists and Nazis on the same side. Could happen again. Here's another good quote from that McDonough book. Really good writing style. Worth getting. The impact of Ott's report and Schleicher's follow-up argument proved decisive. A clear majority of the cabinet felt Schleicher was right, and that he should be given the chance to rule in agreement with the Reichstag rather than going down the unconstitutional road of declaring a state of emergency. Papen felt Schleicher had stabbed him in the back, but he was wrong. Schleicher had stabbed him in the front. After the meeting, Papen went straight to the presidential palace to report on the cabinet meeting. Papen said the president could keep him in office, but in that case, he wanted to sack Schleicher as defense minister, as he could not work with him any longer. The alternative was for Hindenburg to call on Schleicher to become the new German chancellor. There was a lengthy silence before Hindenburg said, "You will think me a scoundrel, my dear Papen, if I change my mind now, but I am too old to take on the responsibility for a civil war at the end of my life. So in God's name, we must let Herr von Schleicher try his luck." So on December 3rd, Kurt von Schleicher becomes the third German chancellor of 1932. You know who actually predicted Schleicher pulling something like this, sort of? The Nazis. They had dealt with the general for some time and knew what to expect of him. Any chancellor who has Herr von Schleicher on his side must expect sooner or later to be sunk by the Schleicher torpedo, wrote Goering. There was a joke current in political circles. General von Schleicher ought really to have been an admiral, for his military genius lies in shooting underwater at his political friends. Schleicher is pretty much unknown to the general public. He's always been the master of backstairs diplomacy, or intrigue, more like. But now he's on the national stage. He also has even less support in the Reichstag than von Papen. Hindenburg also keeps von Papen on as a personal advisor and lets him keep his government apartment to keep him close by. He sends Papen a signed photo with the tag, Ich hatte einen Kameraden, I had a comrade, a friend. Well, what of Schleicher's government, you may ask? It is military. The most military government Weimar has ever had. Field Marshal Hindenburg as president, General von Schleicher as chancellor and Reichscommissioner for Prussia, which means also running the nation's largest police force, and so on down. Schleicher keeps most of von Papen's cabinet, actually, which isn't too much of a surprise since he chose them in the first place. There are 4 new faces, though, 3 of them independents. Friedrich Syrup, Labor Minister, Franz Bracht, Minister of the Interior, and Johannes Popitz, Minister without portfolio. And one guy from the Christian National Peasants and Farmers Party, Günter Gerecke, the new Reich Kommissar for Employment. That party, interestingly enough, was just eliminated from the Reichstag in the November elections, getting no seats. How do Hitler and the Nazis feel about Schleicher as chancellor? They meet on December 5th to talk about it. Joseph Goebbels writes, Strasser takes the position that Schleicher must be tolerated. The Führer had fierce clashes with him. Strasser, as always in recent times, portrays the situation of the party in the blackest colors. Strasser tries to draw those present at the Führer conference over to his side. All, however, stand firmly on the side of the Führer. And they do, with Hitler declaring there will be no collaboration with the new government. The newly elected Reichstag meets for the first time the next day, the 6th. As in September, Hermann Goering is elected as Speaker. He gives an opening speech that straight off questions Schleicher's fitness as Chancellor. Schleicher has no parliamentary support, and on top of that, he's an army officer, and Goering says the army should remain above politics and political controversies. Then the Reichstag gets to business. The first motion is from the Social Democrats calling upon the government to make its declaration of policy. This is traditional. The second is sponsored by the Communists and is a motion of no confidence, as expected. Goering does not allow either to be put to a vote, though. The Nazis do not want another dissolved Reichstag and another expensive campaign that might cost them yet more seats. The Nazis do then manage to introduce and get a bill passed declaring the President of the Supreme Court acting president should the actual president die. Hindenburg is in his mid-80s, and this is aimed at Schleicher because the former law gave those powers to the Chancellor. The Reichstag meets for 3 days, then it's adjourned until what will likely be mid-January 1933. Guess what, though? Whatever happens now with the Nazis, it will be without Gregor Strasser. On December 8, 1932, he resigns from all of his posts within the Nazi Party. He writes a letter of resignation to Hitler, which says a few things, among others, that Hitler's insistence on Chancellor or nothing would lead to nothing, to the party becoming irrelevant. Interestingly enough, Strasser writes he has no intention whatsoever of leading an opposition movement within the party, and he never has. Remember Schleicher telling Hindenburg he could get them to join him? Turns out, Strasser never considered this. There's an article called The Myth of Chancellor von Streicher's Querfront Strategy from Central European History, Volume 41. Querfront is cross-front and refers to cooperation between far left and far right, or nationalist and socialist ideologies, right? The article says the minutes of Schleicher's and Strasser's talks are forgeries. Stuff about Schleicher offering the vice-chancellorship to Strasser seems to be also fabricated. Schleicher's going to Schleicher, I guess, but in any and all cases, Strasser has removed himself from the board. Schleicher also gets a foreign policy success a few days later. On the 11th, Britain, France, Italy, the US, and Germany recognized Germany's right to equality in armaments. He did not expect this very welcome piece of news, but he gives a radio address the 15th to tell the nation about it, and also tells them not to think of him as a soldier, but as a trustee in everyone's interests. He says he is neither socialist nor capitalist, and neither private enterprise nor state control scares him. He also outlines his program. It is focused on providing work for the unemployed. He wants to lower prices on necessities like bread, milk, or coal, and he also wants to suspend the courts that deal with political terrorism, reduce the sentences for disturbances of the peace in general, and thus increase freedom of speech and assembly, which would likely all result in a large increase in political violence. Schleicher maneuvered Papen out with the War Games thing, after maneuvering him in over the summer, after maneuvering Brüning out as chancellor, and even maneuvering his old mentor Groener out. But there is someone else, it seems, who is capable of maneuvering: Franz von Papen. It was indeed a matter of high tragedy for Germany that, at this fateful moment in her history, the disposition of her destiny should have been at the mercy of the capricious rivalry of two such men as Franz von Papen and Kurt von Schleicher. Never had the national interest of the Reich been so ill-served, as at this time the political ineptitude went hand in hand with personal rancor. There's a private men's club in Berlin where the aristocratic elite meet to, well, network. Von Papen gives a speech there the 16th. He says any workable government coalition must include the Nazi Party, and he demands that Hitler be part of the cabinet. Die-hard Hitler supporter Kurt von Schroeder, a financier who runs a group that raises funds for the Nazis, is there to hear the speech, and he talks to von Papen afterwards. When Papen tells him that Hindenburg doesn't really have confidence in Schleicher, Schroeder says, why doesn't von Papen meet with Hitler about forming a government? Von Papen says he already did that a while ago and it didn't work, but sure, he can try again. Schroeder gets the word to Hitler, who says, okay, let's meet up. He tells Schroeder they should do it at Schroeder's house in Cologne on January 4th. After Christmas, von Papen is at his estate in the Saar. Side note, there are still League of Nations troops from Italy, Sweden, and the UK stationed in the Saar post the Great War. I'm pretty sure, though, that the general public wishes to be reunited with Germany and not governed under the current British-French mandate, but a plebiscite is scheduled for 1935, and we'll see how they vote then. Anyhow, on the 28th, December 28th, von Papen gets a phone call from Schroeder to ask him if January 4th in Cologne is okay. And von Papen says, well, he's going to Berlin that day, but he can stop in Cologne on the way. He will give this explanation for the meeting. The answer is simple. The NSDAP had 196 Reichstag seats and remained a major political factor under the Schleicher government. I still had serious doubts whether Schleicher would ever succeed in splitting the party. I thought there was still a possibility of persuading Hitler to join the Schleicher government. If that's the case, then you would think for certain he might mention the meeting to Schleicher, but he doesn't. However, in reality, Papen saw his upcoming meeting with Hitler in January 1933 as a means of gaining revenge over Schleicher for bringing about his own downfall. Hitler's own reason for accepting the invitation to meet Papen was his reluctant acceptance that the party was going down a blind alley if it could not gain power. A meeting with Papen offered him a real chance to finally gain the chancellorship, as he thought Papen was the best person to break down Hindenburg's reluctance to offer him the role. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we find ourselves on New Year's Eve 1932, with Franz von Papen and Adolf Hitler to meet again in just a few days, the former with revenge in mind to take down Schleicher, and the latter seeing a genuine possibility to finally take power. You can't make this stuff up. It's like those daily Chicago radio programs full of drama made for housewives with the soap commercials before them, but taken to a level no one dreamed of. The elections, the intrigue, the violence, the manipulations, the backroom deals, the relentless pursuit of power. It's all just getting bigger and bigger. Whatever happens in 1933, I have a feeling it will be as tumultuous and as shocking as 1932. Another year come and gone, both 1932 and 2025. I do hope wherever you are that as 2026 really gets going, you find yourself well. We shall continue to do what we do in 2026, as we have since 2014, week by week by week, covering the various conflicts we cover. We do that thanks to the Time Ghost Army. They allow us to do all that we do. To be part of this, join the Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Dave Tier, or Tiare, is the Army Member of the Week, and these are the newest commissioned officers. Do not forget to subscribe. Excelsior!